टाइम टेबल में तो बताया नहीं सर ने कि न्यूरो शेड्यूल आया नहीं लेक्चर कौन सा मैम आपका
female reproductive system 3 sorry ये नहीं चल रहा
ना कूलिंग नहीं करता सिर्फ हवा आती है कूलिंग नहीं करता
ठीक रहा है
हाँ जी अभी टेक्नीशियन आए थे आया हुआ चेक कर रहे हैं कह रहे इसकी गैस में प्रॉब्लम है आजा बैठे आजा बैठ स्टार्ट कीजिए मैं लेक्चर कर
अच्छा ये उतार के चेक करो
हाँ जी
मास्क उतार के कोई है आपके पास टिश्यू उसमें मेरा
नो नो
Assalamu alaikum students. We are talking after summer vacations. So now I'm going to start with female reproductive system. I hope you have enjoyed your holidays, and after the holidays, this is my first lecture with you. Female reproductive system we are going to start. So I'm going to do body of uterus and endometrium with endometrial carcinoma. And then I'm going to do ovaries and ovarian tumors. The uterus, as all of you know, has two major components, the lining epithelium, which is called endometrium, and then there is myometrium. The internal cavity of the uterus is lined by endometrium, which is composed of glands and stroma, and myometrium is composed of smooth muscle bundles that form the wall of the uterus. So this is, if you see, is the endometrial cavity. You can see this is the endometrial lining with composed of stroma and glands, and this is all myometrium. So first, we'll quickly see the endometrial, which goes through the cyclical changes, which is known as menstrual cycle. There are three phases: the proliferative phase, the ovulatory phase, and the secretory phase. All of you know that you have studied this in your physiology, so this is just the repetition. In the proliferative phase, the stroma is going to proliferate with the proliferation of the glands as well. At ovulation, endometrial proliferation stops, and the differentiation of endometrium is occurring under the influence of progesterone hormone, which is secreted by the corpus luteum of the ovary. So all of you know that there is hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. So the hypothalamus secrete gonadotropin hormones. Under the influence of gonadotropin hormones, the pituitary is going to secrete follicular stimulating hormone FSH and luteinizing hormone LH. FSH helps in the maturing of the follicles, and when the follicle matures, at the time of ovulation, the ovulation occurs, and the granulosa cells which are lining the follicles, they change into luteal cell and they start secreting progesterone. All of you know that. So in the secretory phase, there is the stroma of the endometrium becomes loose, and the glands become long and tortuous, and we can see subnuclear vacuolations, and later they become supranuclear. So if you see this photomicrograph, you can see proliferative endometrial glands lined by multilayered epithelium. This is stroma. In early secretory phase, you can see all these subnuclear vacuolations. You can see nuclei on the top and vacuoles are present at the bottom. This is early secretory phase. In late secretory phase, you can see supranuclear vacuolation. Vacuoles are present above the nuclei. And this is the menstrual phase. So this is just a repetition of a normal endometrial cycle. So now we are going to see what are the pathologies which can be present in them. The pathologies are dysfunctional uterine bleeding. Dysfunctional uterine bleeding is called an abnormal bleeding which can occur anytime between the cycle, or the cycles can become irregular, they become short, and there are periods of amenorrhea which are seen as well within them. Okay. So cycles are irregular, short, with the periods of amenorrhea. It is these anovulatory cycles are also called because there is no ovulation that is occurring. They are called anovulatory cycles, and this occurs because of continuous estrogen production and non-secretory endometrium. So endometrium is only having the effect of estrogen. There is no progesterone, and it doesn't change into a secretory endometrium. So in dysfunctional uterine bleeding, the causes are different in different age groups. In the pre-puberty phase, they are precocious puberty. In adolescent phase, these are anovulatory cycle coagulation disorders. In the reproductive age, this can be because of abortion, trophoblastic diseases, ectopic pregnancy, leiomyomas, adenomatous polyps, endometrial hyperplasia, or carcinoma, or endometrial carcinoma. So all these I'm going to tell you one by one as we are going through the chapter of female reproductive system. Perimenopausal women. In perimenopausal women, the causes can be anovulatory cycles again, carcinoma, hyperplasia of the endometrium, or polyps in the endometrium. In postmenopausal women, endometrial atrophy, carcinoma, hyperplasia, or polyps, they can all play an important role. So I hope this is clear, the dysfunctional uterine bleeding. In the dysfunctional uterine bleeding, the cycles become irregular, they are short with the periods of amenorrhea, and there is often anovulation. And as I've told you in this chart, this is also given in your Robbins, that these are the causes in different age groups. In the pre-puberty phase, there are precocious puberty. In adolescent phase, the anovulatory cycle coagulation disorder. In reproductive age, abortion, trophoblastic diseases, ectopic pregnancy, leiomyoma, adenomatous polyp, endometrial hyperplasia, and carcinoma. Anovulatory cycles as well, and inadequate luteal phase, and perimenopausal and postmenopausal, I've told you as well. So in the anovulatory cycle, what's happening is the most frequent cause of dysfunctional uterine bleeding is an anovulatory cycle, and this results from an hormonal imbalance, most commonly at the time when the menstruation starts, which is called a menarche phase, and at the time of perimenopausal period, when the menopause is about to start. Other causes can be endocrine disorders like thyroid disorders, adrenal diseases, pituitary tumors. Ovarian lesions can also result in anovulatory cycle. These can be functional ovarian tumors, polycystic ovaries. We are just going to discuss these conditions when I'm going to do the chapter of ovaries with you. Then generalized metabolic disturbances like obesity, malnutrition, chronic systemic diseases, they can all lead to anovulatory cycle. So most frequent cause of dysfunction uterine bleeding is the anovulatory cycle, which results from the imbalance between the hormones, and mostly seen at a time when the menarche starts, that is at the time when the menstruation is going to start between ages of 12 to 14 years, and at perimenopausal women, which is the age between 45, sometimes 40 to 50, or sometimes 45 to 50 years. So other disorders like endocrine disorders, thyroid disorders, adrenal diseases, and pituitary tumors can also lead to dysfunctional uterine bleeding. The ovarian lesions most commonly are functioning ovarian tumors and polycystic ovaries. Generalized metabolic disorders like obesity, malnutrition, and chronic systemic diseases also play a role in anovulatory cycles. Okay, failure of ovulation results in excessive stimulation by estrogen. No progesterone is going to be produced. Endometrial glands undergo mild architectural changes and cystic dilatation. So whenever there is failure of ovulation, the corpus luteum is not going to be formed, and the granulosa cells keep on secreting estrogen hormone, which lead to proliferation of endometrial glands. And this proliferation of endometrial glands will lead to changes within the endometrial architecture. The glands become cystically dilated. Repeated anovulation results in bleeding, which results in endometrial biopsy. So one has to do an endometrial biopsy if the patient is having anovulatory cycle and bleeding in between the cycles as well. Okay. Inadequate luteal phase. The inadequate luteal phase means that it manifests clinically as infertility associated with increased bleeding or amenorrhea, causes because of inadequate progesterone production. So when the corpus luteum is not going to be formed adequately, this is called inadequate luteal phase, and this manifests as infertility or as increased bleeding or amenorrhea, and the causes because of inadequate progesterone production. Progesterone is not produced adequately, so the endometrial stroma does not go into a secretory phase. So these are the causes of dysfunctional uterine bleeding. This is the proliferative phase, which is the inadequate luteal phase as well. You can see the hemorrhage and glands present, but the broken up endometrial stroma is seen as well. This can be because of chronic endometritis. This arrow is pointing towards plasma cells. So chronic endometritis is also a cause of dysfunctional uterine bleeding. Another very important cause is polyps, or these are the endometrial polyps which are projecting between the cavity. These are pedunculated lesions or sessile lesion like a stalk. They are hanging within the cavity. They can also lead to abnormal uterine bleeding, or a leiomyoma, a submucous leiomyoma, which is present under the endometrium, can also be a cause of dysfunctional uterine bleeding. So I hope dysfunctional uterine bleeding is clear. As I've told you, it is a bleeding which occurs in between the menstrual cycle. There can be excessive bleeding, or there can be periods of amenorrhea as well. And it is mostly because of anovulatory cycle. There are different causes at different stages of life, which I have given you in a tabulated manner. And in these micrograms, I have shown you that endometrial polyp, chronic endometritis, leiomyoma, inadequate luteal phase, they can all give rise to dysfunctional uterine bleeding. The next is inflammatory disorders, which can be seen within the endometrium. So endometrium is more vulnerable to inflammatory disorders as compared to myometrium. Acute endometritis and chronic endometritis, and another is tuberculous endometritis. These three conditions can be seen in the inflammatory disorders of the endometrium. In the acute endometritis, it is mostly uncommon because endometrium is quite protective. The bacteria do not invade it directly. It is mostly occur after the delivery or after a miscarriage. When there is a miscarriage, the dilatation and curettage procedure can introduce bacteria into the endometrial cavity. So the other causes can be retained products of conceptions. They are the usual predisposing factors. So normally we do not see bacteria in, because is it a sterile condition, sterile area. So bacteria are not present in the endometrium. They can only invade when there are manipulative procedures in the endometrium, like delivery or miscarriage or retained products of conceptions are present. They can lead to acute endometritis. The bacteria are mostly streptococci, staphylococci. Streptococci and staphylococci are the two most common bacteria which can lead to acute endometritis. The inflammatory response is limited to the endometrial stroma as well, and it is non-specific acute inflammation. And all of you know non-specific acute inflammation. Microscopically, you can see polymorphonuclear leukocytes with macrophages after 48 hours. They are mostly present within the endometrial stroma, leading to the condition of acute endometritis. Then chronic endometritis. Chronic endometritis occurs because of the chronic pelvic inflammatory disorders. Chronic pelvic inflammatory disorders we are going to do in a separate lecture. So in this, you are going to see that chronic pelvic inflammatory disorders can be because of manipulation or surgery in the pelvic area. This can lead to PID. Retained gestational tissue can also lead to pelvic inflammatory disease, and intrauterine contraceptive devices, IUCDs, can also lead to chronic endometritis. So in chronic endometritis, microscopically, you are going to see granulation tissue formation, and all of you know that it is composed of chronic inflammatory infiltrate, which are composed of lymphocytes, plasma cells with macrophages, and neovascularization and fibroblastic proliferation can also be seen within the endometrial stroma. Then intrauterine contraceptive devices can also lead to such kind of chronic endometritis. Tuberculous endometritis. Tuberculosis, you know, is a chronic granulomatous inflammation. It can occur in many areas in the system, many systems of the body as well. This is not a primary lesion. It is a hematogenous spreads through the bloodstream. Tubercle bacilli can come in. They lodge in the endometrium, leading to chronic endometritis, and we can see typical caseating and non-caseating granulomas present within the endometrium microscopically. The diagnosis of chronic endometritis is done by seeing the plasma cells within the stroma, as I've shown you in the earlier photomicrograph. Chronic endometritis presents with abnormal bleeding, pain, discharge, and infertility as well. Treatment of the chronic endometritis is by antibiotics, and of tuberculous endometritis is by anti-tuberculous drugs. So next topic is endometriosis and adenomyosis. It is an important topic. You can be asked in your Viva questions. They can be short essay questions or they can be in your MCQs as well. So what is meant by endometriosis? Endometriosis is defined as the presence of ectopic endometrial tissue which is present outside the uterus, outside the endometrial lining cavity. If endometrial tissue is seen, this is known as endometriosis. And if this endometrial tissue is seen within the myometrium, this is called adenomyosis. So there are two, they mean the same, but they are, because of the location, they are called endometriosis when they are present outside the uterus. When they are present within the myometrium, endometrial glands and stroma, this is called adenomyosis. I hope it is clear. So endometriosis defined as presence of ectopic endometrial tissue outside of the uterus, and adenomyosis, the presence of endometrial tissue, that is glands and stroma within the myometrium. Okay. The ectopic tissue consists of endometrial glands and stroma, but sometimes stroma is seen only with hemocentrin-laden macrophages. The many sites where endometriosis can be seen are ovaries, uterine ligaments, rectovaginal septum, cul-de-sac, pelvic peritoneum, large and small intestine. This can also be seen in the appendix, mucosa of the vulva, mucosa of the vagina and fallopian tube. In the wall of the fallopian tube, endometriosis can be seen in the laparotomy scar as well. In any of these areas, endometrial glands, endometrial stroma, hemorrhage, and hemocentrin-laden macrophages are seen. In microscopic examination, to label endometriosis out of these components, any two are sufficient to label the diagnosis of endometriosis. I hope it is clear. I'm again going to repeat, it is the presence of endometrial glands and stroma outside the endometrial cavity. It is called endometriosis. This can be present in ovaries, uterine ligament, rectovaginal septum, cul-de-sac, pelvic peritoneum, large and small bowel and appendix, mucosa of vulva, vagina and fallopian tube, and laparotomy scar. These are the most common areas where endometrial glands and stroma can be seen to label it as endometriosis. So in these areas, endometrial glands and stroma can be present with hemorrhage and hemocentrin-laden macrophages. In microscopic examination, to label endometriosis, you have to see out of these components, any two are sufficient to label diagnosis of endometriosis. Either endometrial glands are present with hemocentrin-laden macrophages, or stroma is only present with hemocentrin-laden macrophages and hemorrhage. Okay. So this is a photomicrograph which is showing that two or more of the following histological features are sufficient for the diagnosis of endometriosis: endometrial epithelium, that is the glandular epithelium, endometrial glands, like these are shown here, endometrial stroma, which is in the surrounding area, and hemocentrin-laden macrophages here. This is all pink hemorrhage, and these are the hemocentrin-laden macrophages. So this is my photomicrograph of fallopian tube. You can see the epithelium of fallopian tube, and within the wall, within the muscular layer, you can see embedded endometrial glands and stroma. This is endometriosis in the wall of the fallopian tube. This is endometriosis in the ovary. You can see the ovarian stroma on this side. Here you can see well-formed endometrial glands surrounded by endometrial stroma. Okay, and this is another picture of endometriosis in the ovary. In the endometrium is seen line. This is the lining epithelium surrounded by stroma, and here you can see hemocentrin-laden brown macrophages. Hemocentrin-laden macrophages means that they engulf, the macrophages engulf the hemocentrin pigment. So this is all a pigment layer of pigment-laden macrophages. Edematous fibrous connective tissue of the ovary, and a cyst formation which is lined by endometrial epithelium, and stroma is present. Here you can see pigment-laden macrophages, endometrial stroma, and tall columnar endometrium. This is an enlarged version of this area. Okay, so I hope this is clear. I will explain again. Any of these two things can be present for the diagnosis of endometriosis. Number one, the glands. Number two, the epithelium. And number three, the stroma or hemocentrin-laden macrophages. Here you can see, and within the wall of the fallopian tube, you can see endometrial glands surrounded by endometrial stroma. This is called endometriosis within the wall of the fallopian tube. You can see well-formed endometrial glands surrounded by stroma within the ovarian tissue or ovarian stroma. This is endometriosis in the ovary. So this is endometriosis in the ovary, and endometriotic cyst is present. You can see hemosiderin-laden macrophages, edematous fibrous connective tissue, and here a cyst. This cyst lining is largely shown in this photomicrograph, lined by columnar epithelium, stroma, which is composed of endometrial stroma, and hemosiderin-laden macrophages are present here and there. You can see these brown pigment containing macrophages. Hemosiderin is taken up by these macrophages. This is the endometriosis in the wall of the colon. These are the smooth muscle cell of the intestine, and you can see well-formed endometrial glands present surrounded by endometrial stroma within the wall of the colon. What are the complications of endometriosis? Endometriosis can often cause infertility, dysmenorrhea, and pelvic pain. So many of the times females come to the gynecologist with the complaints that they cannot conceive, or because of the infertility, because of the dysmenorrhea or pelvic pain. It is seen in women in active reproductive stage of life between third and fourth decades. It affects 6 to 10% of the female population. Endometriosis in the wall of the intestine can produce intestinal symptoms, like they can have abdominal pain or intolerance to certain kinds of food can be present because of endometriosis within the wall of the small intestine. So these are the complications that endometriosis is going to cause. Pathogenesis of the endometriosis is not clear, but there are certain theories. Number one theory is that regurgitation theory. Number two is benign metastatic theory. Number three is metaplastic theory and extrauterine stem cell progenitor. So what does it mean by regurgitation theory? It means that endometrial tissue implants at ectopic sites via retrograde flow of menstrual bleeding. In the case of menstruation, the bleeding has to go outside, but sometimes it regurgitates and into the fallopian tube, and from there it can go and spread into the different types, like in the abdominal area or into the ovaries. This is the regurgitation theory. Benign metastatic theory holds that endometrium from uterus can spread distant sites via blood and lymphatics. So actually, metastasis only occurs in case of malignant tumors, but this is just a theory. This is not a proof that sometimes benign endometrium can also travel through the bloodstream or lymphatics and go and embed in other areas of the body. Metaplastic theory is that during the development, endometrium arises directly from coelomic epithelium, from which the Mullerian ducts and endometrium originates during embryonic development. So the mesonephric remnants which are left, they can undergo endometrial differentiation and they can produce ectopic endometrium. So during development, endometrium rises from coelomic epithelium, and from which the Mullerian ducts and endometrium originates during embryonic development. Mesonephric remnants which are left, they can change into endometrial differentiation and they can produce endometrium at different sites. As I've already said, that they can be present in the ovary, they can be present in the fallopian tube, in the wall of the intestine, they can be present in the cul-de-sac and the laparotomy scar, and they can also be present within the peritoneum as well. Okay, so these are the different sites where endometrium can be present, and it can be because of the developmental change of mesonephric remnants which are left into endometrial differentiation. Then fourth is the extrauterine stem cell progenitor theory, that stem cells from the bone marrow, they differentiate into the endometrium and they lodge in different areas of the body. So we are not clear how endometriosis occurs, but there are certain theories like regurgitation theory, benign metastatic theory, metaplastic theory, and extrauterine stem cell progenitor theory. Endometriosis implants, they show certain differences from the normal endometrium. They release pro-inflammatory factors and other factors like PGE2, interleukin 1 beta, tumor necrosis factor, interleukin 6, and VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor, platelet-derived growth factor, vascular endothelial growth factor, interleukin 1 beta, tumor necrosis factor alpha, and interleukin 6. They are all secreted by the stroma of the endometrium, which is in the case of endometriosis, not by a normal endometrial stroma. Next is increased estrogen production by the endometriotic stromal cells is also seen, which leads to survival of the endometrium at ectopic site. So in order to survive the endometrial at ectopic site, these stromal cells, they produce estrogen and they lead to survival of ectopic tissue of the endometrium. Increased association is also seen between endometriosis and cancer of the ovary, both endometrioid type and clear cell type. When I do the carcinoma of the ovary, I'll tell you there are two different types. One is endometrioid type and the other is clear cell type. So we'll discuss it in tomorrow's lecture. So there is also increased association of endometriosis of the ovary with the cancer of the ovary, like endometrioid type or clear cell type. Gene mutations are seen in the endometriotic cyst as well. So morphology, you all know, means gross and microscopic appearance. Endometriotic lesions bleed periodically in response to both intrinsic hormone stimulation and extrinsic hormone stimulation. So these endometrial tissue which are present at ectopic site, they also undergo cyclical changes with the menstrual cycle. So they periodically they bleed. Grossly, the nodules appear yellow to brown. They are just beneath the mucosa or serosal side of the involved structure. When the lesions are extensive, organizing hemorrhage lead to fibrous adhesion, and these fibrous adhesion can be between tubes and ovaries and other structures, and these fibrous adhesion will lead to infertility in the young females. Okay, so they have cyclical stimulation as the normal endometrium, and they bleed as well. They appear as yellow to brown nodules under the mucosa or serosal surface. And when lesions are extensive, they organize by fibrosis, and this fibrous adhesion between the tubes and ovaries and other structure can lead to infertility. In the ovaries, they appear as distorted bilateral cystic masses, which can be brown in color due to hemorrhage. These hemorrhagic cysts are called as chocolate cyst of the ovary, endometriotic cyst, or endometriomas. So the ovaries become large. When there is endometriosis, this can be small as well. There can be large chocolate cyst formation as well within the ovaries. And these chocolate cysts are brown in color because of presence of hemorrhage in them. They are also called endometriotic cysts or endometriomas. Morphologically or microscopically, the diagnosis of endometriosis is done, as I've already told you, by seeing endometrial stroma, endometrial gland, hemorrhage, or hemosiderin-laden macrophages and hemosiderin pigment. Okay, another thing is atypical endometriosis. When there are atypical changes seen within the endometriosis, this can be a precursor lesion which can lead to ovarian carcinoma. So atypical endometriosis is a precursor lesion for ovarian carcinoma. This is the gross appearance of an endometriotic cyst. You can see a cyst structure. This is also a cyst which is opened up. And you can see all this hemorrhage present within the cyst lumen. So this is an endometriotic cyst of the ovary on gross appearance. This can be your OSPE slide as well. So in this OSPE slide, you can give 2 points of identification that you can see a large cyst containing hemorrhage. Number 1, you can see a large cyst, cut open section of large cyst, and number 2, you can write hemorrhage present within the cyst lumen. So this is an endometriotic cyst or chocolate cyst in the ovary, which is an endometriosis. This is the microscopic appearance of the same slide. You can see endometrial glands. I've already shown you the slide with the other slides, but I'm showing it again. Endometrial glands surrounded by stroma, and in the surrounding area, you can see ovarian stroma. This is endometriosis in the ovary. This is endometriosis in the wall of the intestine. Here you can see the mucosal glands. Sorry, the mucosal glands present, and here you can see all these endometrial glands. In this case, you can see these endometrial glands and stroma present within the wall of the intestine. This is all intestinal glands. Okay, you can see a certain difference. These are intestinal glands, but these are endometriotic glands. Next is adenomyosis. I have told you this. Adenomyosis is the same, but there is presence of endometrial glands and stroma within the myometrium. Okay, instead, when we call endometriosis, when these are present outside the uterus. But adenomyosis is the presence of endometrial glands and stroma within the myometrium, then it is called adenomyosis. Irregularness of endometrial glands and stroma are seen within the myometrium. On the cut section of in the cases of adenomyosis, you see minute hemorrhagic foci are seen within the myometrium. And microscopically, you see typical endometrial glands surrounded by stroma and hemorrhage, and they are present within the myometrium. I'll show you both the pictures. This is a cut section of uterus showing all hemorrhagic areas within the myometrium. This is the endometriosis of the, adenomyosis of the myometrium. This is the cavity I'll show, as I've showed you already. But in case of adenomyosis, the endometrial glands and stroma have to be discontinuous from the normal endometrial cavity. In the next slide, you can see the endometrial glands and stroma, they are deeply embedded within the myometrium. This is the myometrium, and these are the endometrial glands and stroma, which are deeply embedded within the myometrium. Okay, so I hope it is clear. Adenomyosis and endometriosis. Endometrial polyp. Endometrial polyps, these are the, and as I've shown you in the earlier picture, endometrial polyps can develop, and these can be hanging within the endometrial cavity, or they can be sessile. Sessile means that they are attached to the cavity, and pedunculated, they can be hanging within the endometrial cavity as well. Endometrial polyps are exophytic masses of variable sizes. They project into the endometrial cavity. They may be single or multiple, sessile, varying in size from 0.5 to 3 centimeter in diameter. Sometimes these can be large and pedunculated, and they cause abnormal uterine bleeding as well, as I've already told you. Cytogenetic studies show that stroma in the endometrial polyp show chromosomal abnormalities. As in other benign mesenchymal tumors, so the stroma of the endometrial polyp can be called neoplastic, but again it is a benign neoplasm. The glands may be hyperplastic or atrophic within the endometrial polyp. Polyps become hyperplastic with endometrial hyperplasia. Treatment with tamoxifen lead to polyp formation. Tamoxifen, you know, is a drug which is given for the suppression of breast carcinoma. So when this is given to the patient, the chances of development of endometrial polyps become more. So because of tamoxifen, polyps of the endometrium can form as well, and rarely these polyps can undergo into the adenocarcinoma. This is the photomicrograph of the polyp again. You can see you can see cystically dilated glands and small glands. They are present in a polypoidal manner, and they are covered by the lining epithelium. But in some areas, the lining epithelium is present, but in other areas like here, there is atrophy of the lining epithelium because they are hanging within the cavity. There is friction, and there can lead to denudation of the lining epithelium. So endometrial polyps, as I've told you, they are single, multiple, present within the endometrial cavity. They can be sessile or they can be pedunculated. And the stroma of these polyps is considered neoplastic. So next is endometrial hyperplasia. Endometrial hyperplasia is the most important cause of abnormal uterine bleeding and a frequent precursor of endometrial carcinoma as well. You know, there are precursor lesions in case of many tumors, and in case of endometrial carcinoma, it is the endometrial hyperplasia, which is the precursor lesion of endometrial carcinoma. It is increased proliferation of endometrial glands relative to the stroma, resulting in increased gland to stromal ratio as compared to proliferative endometrium. So what happens in endometrial hyperplasia, the number of glands increases, and there are more glands as compared to stromal fraction is low as compared to glandular fraction. Glands are more as compared to stroma in case of endometrial hyperplasia. Endometrial hyperplasia is also associated with prolonged estrogenic stimulation of the endometrium. And this estrogen stimulation can be because of anovulation, or increased estrogen production can be due to exogenous or endogenous sources. So either anovulatory cycle, which can give rise to an increase in estrogen, can lead to endometrial hyperplasia, or endogenous other factors in which more estrogen production can be seen can lead to endometrial hyperplasia. And exogenous means when you are giving more estrogen to the patient because of certain other reason, they can also lead to endometrial hyperplasia. Associated conditions which can lead to prolonged estrogen stimulation can be one I've told you, anovulatory cycle. Others can be obesity. Peripheral conversion of androgen into estrogen occurs in obesity. In the menopause, more estrogen is produced. Polycystic ovarian syndrome, which we are going to do with ovaries, can also lead to prolonged estrogen stimulation. functioning granulosa cell tumor of the ovary. There are certain tumors of the ovary which produce hormones, and one of them is granulosa cell and theca cell. They produce estrogen hormone. Excessive ovarian cortical function can also lead to increase in estrogen. Estrogen replacement therapy, ERT, which is given in menopausal women, can also lead to this endometrial hyperplasia, but this is no longer given because it also leads to increased chances of breast carcinoma. So this is the endometrial hyperplasia. You can see a normal endometrium, and this is a hyperplastic endometrium in which number of glands are increased, but lining epithelium is still normal. But in this case, you can see increase in the lining epithelium and nuclear pleomorphism is seen as well. This is atypical endometrial hyperplasia. This is also atypical endometrial hyperplasia, quite close to carcinoma in situ. It is also called carcinoma in situ, and this is the precursor lesion for the tumor of the endometrium. So why endometrial hyperplasia occur? It occurs because of the inactivation of PTEN tumor suppressor gene, which is a common genetic alteration both seen in endometrial carcinoma and in endometrial hyperplasia. So inactivation of PTEN gene is present, and when PTEN gene function is lost, the PI3K AKT pathway becomes overactive, and PI3K AKT pathway signaling enhances the ability of estrogen receptor to turn on the expression of target gene. It means when PTEN gene is suppressing, more proliferation of endometrial glands, whatever is required after that PTEN gene stops the activation of PI3K pathway. But when it gets defective, PI3K AKT pathway is more enhanced, and it leads to prolonged activation of proliferation of epithelium, leading to formation of more glands, which lead to endometrial hyperplasia. The loss of PTEN function may stimulate estrogen-dependent gene expression, leading to overgrowth of cell types that depend on the estrogen for trophic signals such as endometrial and mammary epithelial cells. So both areas are affected, endometrium as well as breast tissue. So the loss of PTEN gene is a very important reason for the formation of endometrial hyperplasia and later on endometrial carcinoma. Mutation of PTEN gene are also found in more than 20% of hyperplasia, both with or without atypia. And in Codon syndrome, PTEN gene is also lost. The WHO classification for endometrial hyperplasia is there are only two categories now: non-atypical hyperplasia and atypical hyperplasia. Atypical hyperplasia is also known as endometrial intraepithelial neoplasia. In non-atypical hyperplasia, as I've shown you in this photomicrograph, this is non-atypical endometrial hyperplasia. You can see normal lining epithelium, but in atypical hyperplasia, the lining epithelium has become dysplastic. Dysplasia, you know, is a region in which there is disorientation of nuclei, and the nuclear pleomorphism is seen as well, and this is one category below the neoplasia. And here you can see more dysplastic changes, and there is very less stroma present in between, and this can also be called intraepithelial neoplasia. Intraepithelial neoplasia, all of you know, is when there is neoplasia but confined within the lining epithelium. Okay, I hope it is clear. In the non-atypical hyperplasia, it has a wide range of appearance, but the most important feature is increase in the gland to stroma ratio. Glands show variation in size and shape, and they are dilated with stroma in between. These lesions rarely progress to carcinoma. Atypical hyperplasia we'll do tomorrow because we are short of time. So I'll continue with this lecture tomorrow. Thank you so much. Sorry, there is no time left for question and answers. Thank you. Okay.